Welcome to another episode of Meet the Ocean. I'm your host, Paul North, and today we have the privilege of sharing an interview with a legend in the dive community, National Geographic photographer and all-around whale aficionado, Flip Nicklin. But before we get into all that goodness, I would like to catch you up on some of what's been happening with Meet the Ocean. First of all, I'm rushing to get this introduction recorded because I'm soon leaving to dive the Russian Far East, north of Siberia, on a rarely visited island called Wrangel. You should check it out. It is supposed to be stacked with polar bears and walrus, and I can't wait to see what we find underwater and who we might be able to interview in the high Arctic aboard the fairest in the fleet, the National Geographic Orion. In other news, Meet the Ocean has been rated among the top 10 oceanography podcasts in the world. Number 2, actually, and we are very proud of this, especially since we are on a shoestring budget, and that's where you come in, because we are a listener-supported nonprofit, and you're listening. So we would like to ask those who can to help keep our creative conservation mojo moving forward by donating $5 a month to our Patreon community. I know it doesn't sound like a lot, but if enough people chip in to support the effort, then it adds up, and we can keep sharing the stories that help the public better understand our planet in order to protect it. Keep in mind, Meet the Ocean is not just a podcast. We visit schools and children's hospitals, bringing virtual reality penguins and other interactive educational content, as well as a team of marine educators to the public to express the value of our natural world and the need to defend it against those who would do it harm. Check out our website to find out ways to donate and more educational content at meettheocean.org. That's meettheocean.org. And now, on to our episode. Maybe you are not familiar with the name Flip Nicklin, but I can guarantee that if you, like so many, grew up thumbing through the pages of National Geographic's magazine, then you have certainly experienced his imagery. Flip speaks through his camera. His talent seems so natural that other photographers might look to him with some envy. Except he's way too nice for any of that. Nice enough to record this interview in a very small room in the lower decks of a ship. So small, in fact, that we couldn't even face each other because of the lack of room for our microphone stands. I've traveled with Flip throughout Southeast Alaska, where this interview took place, and spent hours on the bow in Baja California's Sea of Cortez watching the whales go by. He is a legend to all those who indulge in the ocean, a hero to the humpback whales of Hawaii, and a mentor to many photographers who learned not to take themselves too seriously and have the patience and wisdom to enjoy the moments between the whales. I hope you enjoy.
My name is Flip Nicklin, and mostly I take pictures of whales for a living, especially pictures of whales underwater. I first met the ocean probably when I was less than 1 year old. They tell stories, I don't remember, but they tell stories of my brother and I being taken down and put in a bassinet on top of a beach towel at La Jolla Cove while the folks went spearfishing and diving. Of course, someone was watching us and probably gone in the water soon after that. I think my first picture in Skin Diver magazine, I was 4 years old, holding up an abalone. And it was a feature for divers' kids. And my dad was a diver, and we were in there a number of times, usually holding up food.
And you do come from a long lineage of ocean folk.
My grandfather, my mother's father, who died right before I was born in a diving accident, was a construction diver, a hard hat diver, built a number of the piers off of California and was working on a dam in the Colorado River when he was lost. Oh, my dad's started the second dive shop in San Diego, the Diving Locker. Went on to become a still photographer, but especially cameraman, an underwater photographer. Worked on a bunch of documentaries on whales and ocean life, but also worked on films like The Deep and The Abyss and a couple of the James Bond films.
You and I have traveled before, and I can't remember the number except that it was very high. And you said you have been eye to eye with how many species of whales?
I think I've been eye to eye with 28 species of whales, dolphins, and porpoise, and have pictures. And a number of the things and the stories I tell, I probably wouldn't tell if I didn't have a picture.
So clearly you had the ocean in your family growing up, but what was it that really grabbed you and made you say that you want to make a career out of this?
I knew I was going to have a career around the water, in the water, under the water. I ran dive shops when I was young. I started teaching diving when I was 18. I didn't know it was going to have anything to do with photography, probably until I met Bates Littlehales. And Bates was the underwater guy for National Geographic in the 50s and 60s. Got in touch with my father when my father had a chance to ride a whale and had pictures taken and film taken, and ended up being the talk of news for a while. And Bates met my father because my father was a whale expert. He'd seen one. And Bates was a hero to me. I started taking pictures. I started taking Bates and my dad out, where I would go out and I'd pull the anchor, run the boat while they were diving. And one day Bates gave me a camera. I was about 17, and I took a picture that came out okay. And the dream was probably born, as unrealistic as it might have seemed, to work for National Geographic. And it was only about a decade later when that actually happened.
And can you describe your first Nat Geo assignment?
My first National Geographic assignment was to go to the Northwest Hawaiian chain for 3 months, working as the diving and camping assistant to Jonathan Blair on a story about the refuge islands, the Northwest Hawaiian chain. And it was camping on desert islands. It was going to a bunch of very remote islands, mostly doing birds and seals and turtles, but some underwater stuff. And I was the assistant, but I got 2 pictures published in the magazine from that story. And I told everybody I'd been published in National Geographic, and got a few little stories here and there, a few little pieces here and there, did a couple other jobs, scientific jobs, works at SeaWorld. And that was 1976. In 1979, I got my first big story accepted on sharks and started doing whales at the same time, and really was a National Geographic photographer.
So a lot of people see the end results of a story. They pick up the magazine, they open it, their eyes get wide. But I don't think a lot of people know the extent of the work that goes into some of these assignments. Can you perhaps describe that a little bit?
Well, I'd love to. The early days, especially 1976 to 1989, I don't think I had to have a budget. We didn't really have time allowances, and we would go off. And I think the difficult thing and wonderful thing was we were told almost nothing. We were given almost no direction. And our boss, Bob Gilka, would say, if you're going to go take pictures of Timbuktu, I don't want you to shoot the pictures we think about Timbuktu here in Washington, D.C. I want you to go to Timbuktu and shoot the pictures we don't know about. And I got to do that kind of exploration with photography, first of sharks and then with whales and dolphins. But I would go and hear what people were thinking and saying about whales and dolphins, start researching what scientists were learning, and trying to bridge that gap and put sort of the myth and magic of whales on a more solid footing, but not lose the magic.
Well, just for perspective, how many stories have you done?
I've done 20 feature stories, 3 books, parts of a bunch of stories, and 10 books altogether. 3 books for National Geographic, but books for other folks too.
And now you get to travel the world and teach people about photography.
Yeah, I like my job now. I'm closing in on 70 and still get to go to the same places, seeing the same stuff, share it with other folks. I never thought I'd have so much fun helping other people take pictures. But this is great fun. I mean, just on this trip, we've stood looking at humpback whales under rainbows and had a morning full of killer whales doing cool things close to the boat. And people enjoying it, whether they're taking pictures or not, and whether they're taking pictures with a big fancy camera or a phone, still just enjoying the idea of trying to tell the story they were seeing.
So, born in California, but you have now chosen to live in Alaska. What made that decision happen?
It turns out that Juneau, Alaska is a very good place for 5'4" redheads. I met one, married her, moved to Juneau, and probably the best move I ever made in my life.
Yeah, I'd say so. And you have shared some photography from your home, which looks like a natural history spot in and of itself.
We moved into a place. We had no idea. It's a very nice place. It has a nice view. It was close to the harbor. We keep our boat. And so we moved in. We had no idea that there were eagles that sat right next to it on one side, that there was a salmon stream with bears feeding on the other side of it. It's a condo, but on the other side of the condo development, where very often we have killer whales feeding in the harbor itself and killer whales going by out front. And it's like living in a very, very comfortable photographic blind.
Oh, not bad at all. Is there any particular assignment that stands out as a story that you'd like to share?
I think probably the assignment that I talk about most now and learn the most from was an assignment to shoot unicorns. Actually, it was to shoot narwhal, but unicorns of the sea, all the tusk and the myth of the unicorn comes from narwhal tusks.
Narwhal, my favorite. Oh, I should probably introduce myself. I'm Charlotte Fisher, youth correspondent for Meet the Ocean, and there are few things I like talking about more than, you guessed it, narwhal. So let's dig in before Flip distracts us with his super cool story. Narwhal are medium-sized toothed whale that live year-round in the Arctic, not including that rockstar tusk, which is actually a tooth. They can grow to about 18 feet long. They dine on Arctic cod and Greenland halibut and can dive nearly a mile down into the depths of the ocean. They can live for around 50 years or so. Narwhals share a family with beluga whales, which are also cool, but I mean, come on, no one is relating belugas to mythical creatures like the unicorn. The question is, how did the myth of the unicorn come about? Well, when Genghis Khan and his army were horsing about on the Eurasian steppe, they cut off Europe's access to elephant ivory, which was highly prized. So, Viking and Inuit hunters were able to trade narwhal tusks for their weight in gold. Superstition abounded. Living so far away, no one had ever actually seen a narwhal. Still to this day, we encounter people who don't believe they exist. So clearly, the only logical conclusion the kings and queens of Europe could make was that magical winged horses were growing these horns out of their skulls. Sounds practical, right? A cup from the so-called unicorn horn was considered to have magic powers, protecting anyone drinking from the cup from being poisoned. It had other powers too, pretty much any power someone with an imagination could make up. This, along with other legends, was why narwhals were given the most excellent name, Unicorn of the Sea. These sea unicorns are one of the most legendary ocean critters to ever live on our planet, and I must admit that I am only slightly jealous that Flip got to swim with them. Maybe one day.
And I had no experience in the Arctic. Went up the first time with a number of people who had not much more experience than I did, but ended up working with a family up there that taught me a number of things. I worked up there from 1985 till about 1998, most seasons. And the first assignment, trying to do narwhals, I didn't have a decent picture for 3.5 months. And at 3.5 months, the film review was literally nothing usable yet. Finally, I got it. And I had one great day, a narwhal fight. We shot it above water, shot it underwater, shot narwhals fighting with each other and crossing their tusks around each other. And that was great. 7 hours of one day made the story. The magazine story was great. They were really happy to have it. It was one of those stories where there were probably only 6 or 7 good pictures, but they were new. But the important thing was, in those 3.5 months of frustration of not getting narwhals, I was learning about the Arctic. I was learning about the Inuit people, learning about polar bears and belugas and bearded seals and all the other stuff up there. And it turned out to be 7 stories for National Geographic on different subjects and working as a consultant on a number of films. And it just caused me to love the high Arctic.
So here in 2017, I recently had a conversation and someone said, I thought narwhals were a myth. So how does it strike you to know that you and your work probably introduced these species to a number of people?
Well, I love that. And the fact that when I went, the Geographic had just done a story on narwhal hunters in Greenland. And they did it. And when I proposed my story, they said, well, that's fine, but we don't think you can photograph narwhals alive. And we tried to go up there, to have the success, to tell that story. We came back the next year on another assignment and stopped at a sporting goods store in Montreal and asked people what narwhal were and got all kinds of very interesting answers. Very few knew what they were.
What did they behave like when you got in the water with them? Were they skittish? Did they come to you? Or
male narwhals are very, very, very shy for a very good reason. They're being hunted. It's a hunt that is a very sustainable hunt, but still they're being hunted. So they don't want to be around people. They don't want to be around machine noise, especially. They can even tell the shapes that are sort of appear man-made as you're looking up through the ice. When we went down and photographed and looked up and showed the Inuit guys what they were seeing, they moved their machines from being on ice to being on snow, so you couldn't see them from down below. Very hard. And even the stuff we got, the underwater stuff we shot, and the best surface stuff was all from kayaks. And working from kayaks and diving from kayaks, and even then, during this big fight, there was a dying and dead female and 2 males that for some reason were defending her and fighting off group after group of other males that came in. And in the quiet times, I tried slipping in the water from the kayak, which is a challenge, with dry suits and all the gear, snorkeling and trying to get in, and they would just meld away and disappear. The only time I could get in the water with them was when the fight was really on, and it was like a fight in a pool room where everybody's got a pool cue hitting each other, and you're in the middle of all these 9 and 10 foot tusks waving around, and one of the young ones, maybe with a 7-foot tusk, came up and put that tusk about 18 inches from my chest, just for a very short time. You could feel the little sonic clicks, like someone flicking your chest with a pencil, and then moved off. But I got 3 or 4 pictures, and those are the only 3 pictures I know of anywhere of narwhals fighting underwater. So it was great. It was challenging. It was scary. And I think it's the best stuff I shoot is the stuff you couldn't figure a way to go do again.
Yeah, there's that moment when the chaos is erupting and, you know, I'm sure your heart rate picks up as mine does when the moment takes off, but then you have to hunker down and make sure that you're actually getting the shot.
People ask all the time, what were you thinking? What were you sensing? What did you think? I'm not sure thinking was involved at all at that moment. It's just you're worrying about getting the shot. You're worrying about the right settings. You're worried about all kinds of other things. But it's that moment. I mean, I'd spent 3.5 months with nothing. And all of a sudden it was there. Whether I could get it or not was a different thing. But it was there. And probably the most exciting thing I as a photographer go through.
How would you describe the Arctic for someone who's never been there before?
I think the Arctic is wonderful. I worked in the Antarctic actually before the Arctic, and they're both great and interesting and beautiful in their own ways. The Arctic has people, and it has big predators. And that makes it really interesting. To go and work in the Antarctic with a scientist who has a decade of experience is great. To go work in the Arctic and work with the people I work with who have generation upon generation upon generation of experience was just a whole different, wonderful. We sort of grew up as hunter-gatherers in the diving business, diving for abalone, diving for lobsters, shooting a fish. And these people's lives were built on what they could bring from the resources. Everything they had, everything they wore, everything they had to work with came from the wildlife around them.
This is Jonathan Kingston down in Villarica de la Veracruz, Mexico, working on a maritime archaeology project. We're looking for Hernan Cortez's sunken fleet of 1519. And the whole reason I'm on this project can really be traced back to meeting Flip Nicklin. The first time I met Flip was in 2006. I'd been invited to be an AV guy on the island of Molokai for a reunion of a bunch of National Geographic photographers who were celebrating a legendary editor's 90th birthday, Bob Gilka. So I got to be a fly on the wall and hear all these guys' stories, and I just wanted so much to sort of lead that same life. And it was during that meeting that I met Flip, and Flip asked me over to assist him on his Maui whale project. So, of course, I said yes. I mean, this is the opportunity of a lifetime. And I get on an airplane in early 2007. I fly over to Maui. I took the red-eye in because it was a cheaper flight. And I was just super, super tired when I landed. But they were going out on the boat that day. And, of course, I wanted to join them on the boat. So they had this little, I don't know, I think it's about a 23-foot-long Grady white boat. I was tired as all get out, so not a whole lot happens some days on the water when you're waiting for whales to do interesting stuff, and that happened to be one of those days. Not a whole lot was going on, so I lay down in the gunnel of the boat and put my hat over my eyes, and I just couldn't keep my eyes open any longer, and took a nap. And I was thinking to myself as I was falling asleep, oh man, I'm really blowing it with this guy. I'm first day on the boat and I'm taking a nap in the gunnel and thinking I've just, blown all my chances. Anyways, about a half hour later, I woke up refreshed and took my hat off my eyes, and Flip's sitting nearby, and he's kind of smiling down at me and very genuinely said, "You're going to go far in this business." And that was the opposite reaction of what I had expected. But it was just so Flip. He's just such a wonderful mentor, a wonderful guy. And he's taught me so much about working on research projects. The one I'm on now is on a tiny little boat, and just being able to maintain a small footprint, helping out the researchers in any way I can, being a part of the team, not just being a media guy, but actually putting blood, sweat, and tears behind the project. And those were all things I learned from Flip, and I just can't thank him enough for sort of pointing me in the right direction very early on in my career.
Give it a name. Be it 3, 1, 2. Give it a name. That's what humans do.
For those who don't know about it, could you tell us more about Skin Diver Magazine?
Well, Skin Diver Magazine was an early diving magazine aimed at really scuba diving as much or more than skin diving, free diving. But it was the journal. It was the one dive magazine when I was a kid. It had the Driftwood column, Divers Kids, Miss Driftwood, which as a young man was interesting. A girl in a bikini. But it was just it was the source for diving. And diving was very small in the 50s and 60s. Diving was commercial or military or scientific. There wasn't any family diving, really, very little photography. In the 70s, it grew into something completely different. And I don't think we ever dreamed it would become as big a thing and as many people would be involved and enjoying underwater as they do today.
That famous photo of your father sitting on the back of a whale, what kind of whale was it?
It was a Brutus whale. It was 1963. My father had inherited 2 cameras from Connie Limbaugh, the first diving officer at Scripps. And he had a movie camera, a 100-foot wide 16-millimeter movie camera, and he had a 2 1/4 still camera, a Rolling Marine. So when they found the whale, and they looked at the whale, and they photographed the whale, and they filmed the whale, and he sat on the back of the whale, they had evidence of it. Again, it's one of those stories. Without those pictures, it would have been a nice story, shake your head, wonder if it's real. The pictures, and especially the film that you could show people when there was no film of whales underwater, ended up being sent off to New York. And there was a production company called Goodson Todman Productions. They had a celebrity TV show, quiz show, called To Tell the Truth. So my dad went back to New York. He was with 2 other guys making up stories about riding a whale. My dad was telling the true story. And it sort of introduced my dad to the outside world and the world to him, especially to National Geographic, and it changed everything in our lives.
Yeah, I mean, what an incredible moment, because here, 2017, we are saturated with imagery, but in that, you're carving new territory and stuff that led exactly to where you are today. We know the ocean. We spend our time in it. We've existed in it for a number of years, capturing creatures, for you large, for me largely the small invertebrates. But when we speak to our audiences, how do you try and convey why they need to better consider the health of the ocean relative to their own lives?
When I think of the oceans, and especially the mysteries in it, the big life, small life in the oceans, I always think of Ken Norris talking about whales and dolphins. And one of the things he would say was how much more we knew about them before we looked at them closely. And I think we're doing that with the oceans. And the idea that we do have all these ideas, largely, it's not that they're wrong, but they're incomplete. And we're always finding with whales, with dolphins, with other things in the sea, new little tidbits to make it more sense and relate it more to how we're living our lives and what we're doing. So it's a beautiful world full of mysteries, and those mysteries are being revealed bit by bit. And it's always exciting. On a day like today, you're going through a beautiful place. The sun is out. The islands are great. And you know, any minute, some little tidbit will come up that'll make you understand it more. And it's just special. It could happen any minute.
I'd like to ask you about whale tails. How did that all get started?
We started a nonprofit. I sold my photo collection in the late 90s when people wanted to buy collections and when secondary sales were more important for a good chunk. And I took part of that money and went back to work with Jim Darling, the researcher I did my first whale story with in National Geographic. And we went back to Maui and looked into starting a nonprofit and continuing research on humpback whale breeding in the islands, especially the social function of whale song, one of those great mysteries that you look on. And it was aimed at just getting a little nonprofit so people could make direct donations rather than going through a university and having them take their amount off. And that was great. As we continued, we picked up another partner, Megan Jones, and we became Whale Trust. And down the road, and I do remember, there was a resort manager that said he would like to do something about whales, maybe a benefit. Did we have an idea? And we did eventually. But we were excited about the idea, so we started a little 3-day symposium. And the idea was we would say what we knew scientifically, we would show what had come out in new documentaries, talk about new education, and share what we were learning about whales out in front of Maui. And we would ask the community that we worked with to help support us. That has grown. It's gotten bigger. 2 years ago, we passed $500,000 in money we've distributed, not just to our organization, but to other organizations working in the area. And it's become sort of a very nice symposium. We've had as many as 1,000 people come to the talks. I think this year, and most years we're around President's Day long weekend in February, but it's there's 3 afternoons of talks. There's a bunch of whale watches led by world experts from around the world. There's some receptions, but it's sharing what we're learning about whales with folks and asking them to come and see what we're doing and support what we're doing. And it's great fun.
So given the richness of what you've just shared with us, I have to ask, is there a place people can go online to see your work? No, okay.
Minden Pictures. Minden Pictures is my agent, and he has stuff. And if you want to see the stuff I'm probably most involved in now is I'm sort of retired. I love doing the stuff with the National Geographic expeditions and Lindblad. But if you go to whaletrust.org, a lot of my work is there. And honestly, most of my work today, though I love selling pictures still, and I have some work in some galleries, most of it is trying to move forward what we're learning about whales and working with the people at Whale Trust whale tales, and mentoring some young guys coming up is the stuff I most care about. And whaletrust.org is a place you can dig that out.
Meet the Ocean is produced by Paul North and Andrew Gettings, with sound design by Kelsey Anderson and music by Vin Gast. Special thanks to National Geographic photographer Flip Nicklin for the interview, and to National Geographic creative photographer Jonathan Kingston for sharing a story about his mentor. And thanks to Charlotte Fisher, our youth correspondent, for sharing her love for narwhals. Don't forget to go to our website, meettheocean.org, to find out more educational podcasts, videos, and ways to donate to our nonprofit to help us continue to share the story of our planet. Until next time, may the saltwater be with you.